Red Rock Command Academy was a fortress of tradition, a sprawling citadel carved into the cliffs of the western frontier, where the bloodlines of generals, admirals, and statesmen forged their heirs in the crucible of steel and discipline. The Y Academy grounds gleamed with precision. Rows of steel barracks, shooting ranges humming with live rounds, drones tracing patterns in the sky like silent sentinels. Cadets in polished tactical gear moved in perfect synchrony, each insignia stitched onto their uniforms with pride and the weight of legacy. Elena Marsh did not belong here. She stood alone on the sun-baked training field, the desert wind tugging. At the hem of her faded jeans and the loose sleeves of her worn white button-down shirt. No insignia, no tactical vest, no expensive gear screaming pedigree, just a simple canvas backpack slung over one shoulder, battered and threadbare. Her sneakers were dusty from the long walk across the academy grounds, and her light brown hair was pulled into a no-nonsense ponytail, strands whipping against her face. Eyes turned, whispers rose. At first it was the instructors, their brows knitting in confusion. Then the cadets, their gloved hands pausing mid-drill, their gazes narrowing. Into blades. Who let the janitor onto the field? Someone muttered loud enough to ripple through the rows of recruits. Lost civilian, another snickered, adjusting his $2,000 tactical vest with a sneer. Elena remained still, her expression unreadable, her gray eyes steady. The sun beat down mercilessly, but she did not flinch, did not retreat. A squad leader, his uniform immaculate, and his boots so polished they mirrored the sky, leaned against an armored Humvee, folding his arms with a smirk. Probably someone's girlfriend, he said, the disdain dripping from every word. Here for a free tour. Laughter rolled across the field like thunder. Cadets nudged one another, their gleaming gear clinking softly. Elena's presence was a crack in the Academy's meticulously curated world, a flaw they could not tolerate. A sharp voice cut through the growing mockery. "Miss, civilians are not permitted beyond the observation deck," barked an officer, her face tight with barely concealed irritation. She pointed toward the distant overlook where a few visiting dignitaries watched from behind reinforced glass. Elena didn't move. She simply adjusted the strap of her backpack and surveyed the field with calm detachment, as if the insults, the laughter, the razor-edged scorn were nothing more than a passing breeze. But to the cadets, her silence was an offense, a defiance. A group of elite trainees moved closer, circling her like vultures drawn to wounded prey. Their boots crunched over the gravel as they closed the distance, their smirks sharpening. "Nice sneakers," one of them jeered, tapping the toe of his $500 combat boot against the dirt. "Guess they were on clearance at the thrift store." Elena's gray eyes flickered briefly to his boot, then back to his face, cool and unimpressed. Another cadet, a senator's daughter known for her ruthless ambition, stepped forward, her braids swaying behind her. "Maybe she thinks this is a job. Fair?" she said loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Only she forgot the part where you need credentials to matter." The laughter this time was crueler, harsher, a storm gathering strength. Still, Elena stood firm. No badge, no name tag, no explanation. The Academy prided itself on hierarchy, on bloodlines, on polished appearances. And here was this woman, standing in the heart of their empire, dressed like a ghost from another world. To them, she was a threat. To Elena Marsh, they were merely noise. Beyond the field, the red cliffs shimmered in the heat, the Academy's banners, snapping in the wind, oblivious to the quiet war igniting at their feet. Elena tightened her grip on her backpack, her heart steady, her purpose unwavering. She hadn't come here to prove herself. She had come to watch. And when the moment was right, they would see exactly who they had dared to mock. The air at Red Rock Command Academy crackled with the tension of a gathering storm. Elena Marsh's presence, unassuming, silent, unadorned, was an affront to everything the Academy worshipped. Here, appearances mattered more than grit. Bloodlines outweighed experience, and legacy was worn like a crown. The cadets, clad in $1,000 tactical kits embroidered with prestigious family crests, couldn't comprehend someone standing here without a name to flaunt or a pedigree to shield her. They didn't see Elena's silence as strength. They saw it as weakness, and weakness at Red Rock was prey. A ripple of cold laughter spread across the training grounds. Near the firing range, a tall cadet with sculpted features and an arrogant tilt to his head leaned against a weapons rack. His name was Wyatt Harrington, the son of a senator, the star of every war game simulation, the future face of Red Rock's elite alumni. "Maybe she thinks she's on a sightseeing tour," he said, tossing a training rifle from one hand to the other. With lazy disdain, his voice carried easily across the field. Another cadet, a diplomat's daughter with icy blue eyes and a sharp tongue, chuckled as she strapped her tactical gloves tighter. "Sightseeing? Please. She's probably hoping to land a husband, not a mission." Laughter erupted again, harder now, each cruel note a stone hurled at Elena's composure. Elena shifted her weight slightly, her sneakers scuffing the gravel, her face unreadable. She gazed toward the horizon where the cliffs rose like ancient sentinels, her gray eyes reflecting the silent patience of stone. They mistook her stillness for surrender. They had no idea that in another lifetime, she had stood unmoving in the heart of battlefields where real storms raged, where real blood was spilled. Another cadet swaggered closer, his tactical vest bristling with mock medals earned in simulations, not wars. "Bet she couldn't tell the difference between a field manual and a fashion magazine," he quipped. This time the laughter was sharper, a serrated edge meant to draw blood. Even the instructors, who should have known better, exchanged smirks. They, too, had become drunk on the Academy's illusion. That power was born in titles and polished boots, not in the crucible of real sacrifice. A young logistics officer, no older than 25, sauntered past Elena, intentionally brushing her, shoulder hard enough to make her sway slightly. He didn't look back. From the observation deck, some of the visiting dignitaries shifted uncomfortably, sensing the cruelty festering in the sunlit field below. But none spoke. Red Rock had long ago trained them to worship strength and silence over integrity. Elena exhaled slowly through her nose. She adjusted her backpack again, the simple motion strangely defiant amidst the sea of tailored uniforms and arrogant stares. The desert wind kicked up a swirl of dust around her, catching in the laces of her worn sneakers, tugging at the hem of her shirt. She stood rooted in place as if the earth itself had claimed her. They could laugh. They could sneer. It wouldn't matter. Not when the real trials began. From the far edge of the field, Wyatt Harrington cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, "Hope you packed sunscreen, sweetheart. It's gonna get hot out here for civilians." The cadets roared in approval, their tactical boots stomping in mock applause. Elena finally turned her head slightly, her gray eyes sweeping across the faces twisted with amusement, superiority, and the smug certainty of unearned power. She said nothing, but deep inside, a familiar fire kindled, a flame she had thought long extinguished when she walked away from the life that had once defined her. She hadn't come to Red Rock to fight, but sometimes the battlefield found you whether you wanted it or not. And when it did, Elena Marsh knew exactly how to survive. The laughter continued, hollow and cold, unaware that the storm they had called down upon themselves had already begun to stir. The next hours stretched like a slow crucifixion under the pitiless sun. Elena Marsh moved across the grounds, silent, invisible in the way that only the despised could become. Every step she took seemed to ripple outward, a provocation without intent. She wasn't trying to be seen, but at Red Rock, existing without the proper pedigree was a sin that demanded punishment. The cadets organized their scorn into something more deliberate. Wherever Elena went, whispered insults trailed her like smoke. A canteen accidentally spilled muddy water near her boots. A training drone buzzed too low, forcing her to duck amidst jeers. Her path through the mess hall was a gauntlet of bumped shoulders and pointed laughter. Still, she said nothing. Still, she endured. She sat alone on the concrete steps leading to the obstacle course, her canvas backpack beside her like a quiet sentinel. She sipped water from a dented bottle, her posture relaxed but her senses razor-sharp. Every glance, every muttered comment, every sneer, she absorbed it all without flinching. To the cadets, her refusal to react was an invitation to escalate. They couldn't understand it. They were trained to dominate through displays of power, to seek the crack in the armor and wedge it wide open. Yet Elena's calm presented no seams, no weakness. It infuriated them. Vanessa Hale, the daughter of a decorated admiral and self-appointed queen of Red Rock's cadets, decided it was time to break the intruder properly. She sauntered over, flanked by a knot of her loyalists, each of them gleaming in spotless tactical gear that made them look like walking recruitment posters. Vanessa stopped a few feet from Elena, arms crossed, eyes glinting with malicious amusement. "You lost, civilian?" she said, her voice dripping honeyed poison. "Or are you just here to take notes for a tell-all memoir?" The cadets behind her chuckled, the sound sharp and rehearsed. Elena looked up slowly, her gray gaze meeting Vanessa's without a flicker of emotion. She didn't rise, didn't speak. Her silence filled the space between them like a wall of stone. Vanessa's smirk tightened. She hated being ignored more than she hated being challenged. "You know," she continued, louder now so the nearby squads could hear, "there's a reason we wear uniforms here. It's about unity, discipline, respect. Not thrift store chic." More laughter, this time tinged with an ugly edge. Vanessa bent down slightly, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper meant only for Elena. "You don't belong here, and no one's coming to save you." Elena blinked once, slowly, as if Vanessa's words were nothing more than dust against her skin. Across the field, Wyatt Harrington watched, arms folded, a satisfied grin on his face. To him, this was entertainment, a cleansing ritual of sorts. Preserve the Academy's purity by humiliating the intruder. But if any of them had looked closer, really looked, they might have seen the truth flickering behind Elena's stillness. The way a soldier learns to endure interrogation, humiliation, pain, not by resisting, but by retreating into a fortress within, where their tormentors could never reach. Elena wasn't retreating. She was waiting. The siege of whispers and laughter continued through drills and lectures. Even instructors, sensing which way the political wind blew, made offhanded comments about proper decorum and standards as their eyes slid toward her. By the time the afternoon sun hung low and red over the cliffs, the cadets were convinced they had broken her. After all, what strength could a nameless woman in thrift store clothes possibly have? They did not realize they had mistaken stillness for surrender. And Red Rock was about to learn that the ones who endure the siege are the ones who can bring down the fortress. By the time the sun sank behind the jagged cliffs, Red Rock Command Academy transformed into a theater of cruelty. The cadets, emboldened by hours of unchecked mockery, decided that whispers and passive aggression were no longer enough. They wanted spectacle. They wanted blood. The mess hall courtyard, usually reserved for evening drills and tactical briefings, became their chosen arena. Wyatt Harrington took the lead, his voice booming over the clamor of moving squads. "Attention," he barked, snapping a salute dripping with mockery. "We have a guest among us tonight. A civilian hero. Let's make sure she feels welcome." Laughter exploded across the grounds. Elena Marsh stood at the courtyard's edge, her sneakers coated in dust, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She watched, impassive, as the cadets corralled into a loose semicircle, their polished boots scraping against the concrete. Their faces gleamed with anticipation, the glee of sanctioned cruelty. Vanessa Hale strode forward, carrying a canteen of water, and a smirk sharpened to a blade. "For your service," Vanessa said sweetly, before upending the canteen over Elena's shoes. The muddy water splashed onto the faded canvas, soaking into the fabric, pooling around the worn soles. The cadets howled in laughter, some clutching their sides, others slapping each other's backs as if they had just witnessed a grand act of rebellion. A low-ranking logistics officer whistled mockingly. "Maybe next time, bring a uniform instead of a souvenir bag," he jeered, tossing a crumpled academy pamphlet at Elena's feet. It fluttered uselessly before landing in the puddle. Elena's gray eyes dropped to her soaked sneakers for a fraction of a second. She inhaled once, the breath barely visible, and then slowly raised her gaze to the crowd. They met her look with smug certainty. In their minds, she was nothing, an outsider who should have known better than to set foot among them. No. One helped her, not the instructors leaning against the observation railings, not the staff pretending to adjust their equipment nearby. Silence fell over the courtyard for a moment, thick and expectant, as if even the desert itself were holding its breath. And then Wyatt, grinning broadly, stepped forward with a clattering metal bucket in his hands. "We thought you might like a little Red Rock welcome kit," he said, and without warning he tipped the bucket forward. A slurry of mud and sand, gathered from the training grounds, splashed across Elena's jeans, staining the faded denim, coating, her shirt splattering across her backpack. The cadets erupted into fresh laughter, louder and meaner, their faces alight with triumph. It wasn't just about mocking her now, it was about erasing her, reducing her to a joke so thoroughly that she would have no choice but to leave. Elena stood motionless as the mud dripped from her sleeves. The desert wind lifted her ponytail slightly, the only movement she allowed herself. Wyatt leaned in, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You don't belong here," he hissed, "and tomorrow you'll wish you never showed your face." Vanessa crossed her arms smugly, satisfied, her squad arrayed behind her like a wall of polished arrogance. Somewhere beyond the courtyard, the academy, banners snapped in the cooling evening breeze, their proud emblems a cruel contrast to the filth staining Elena's clothes. And still, she said nothing. Still, she stayed. The cadets began to drift away, laughing and jostling, confident they had delivered the final blow. The staff retreated, their complicity silent and damning. Elena remained at the center of the empty courtyard, her figure a small, silent defiance against the vast machinery of Red Rock's hierarchy. She reached down slowly, lifted her mud-soaked backpack onto her shoulder, and turned her face toward the night sky where the first stars had begun to pierce the darkness. The siege had grown public now. The knives had been drawn. The blood had been let, but Elena Marsh was still standing, and in the wars she had fought before, survival was always the first victory. Morning at Red Rock dawned sharp and merciless, the sun a molten blade cutting across the dusty training fields. The cadets gathered, yawning and bantering, their confidence unshaken after the previous evening's public shaming. Today was supposed to be a routine simulation, one of the Academy's signature challenges, a coordinated search and rescue exercise deep in the Red Rock Canyons. They were divided into squads of 10, equipped with radios, maps, dummy weapons, and a critical mission objective: locate and extract a wounded officer while maintaining formation and communication under simulated enemy pressure. The instructors gave curt orders. The drones lifted into the sky, their cameras trained. On the action below, the exercise began. At first, everything unfolded as expected. Squads moved in tight formations. Radio chatter buzzed across channels. Cadets barked orders they barely understood, trying to mimic the polished authority of their parents. But Red Rock's canyon trails were merciless. Heat distorted the air. Rock formations twisted sight lines. Communication signals faltered. And one by one, the squads began to fracture under the pressure. Wyatt Harrington's team was among the first to stumble. Their map was misread. They veered too far south, wasting precious time circling dead ends. Arguments erupted over radio frequencies. Orders overlapped and contradicted. Vanessa Hale's team fared no better. Overconfident, they spread out too thinly, exposing their flanks and getting ambushed by simulated hostiles staged by Academy staff. Within an hour, chaos reigned. Squads were lost, objectives abandoned, fake casualties mounting in every direction. Radios crackled with confusion. Drones overhead captured the disarray in stunning clarity. Broadcasted live to the command center, where instructors and visiting dignitaries watched in growing dismay. From the overlook near the supply depot, Elena Marsh observed. Still dressed, in her mud-stained jeans and faded shirt, she stood at the edge of the field, arms crossed loosely, her gray eyes cool and calculating. She watched the cadets blunder, watched the polished uniforms unravel. The arrogant voices crack under the weight of real uncertainty. They were trained for optics, not for survival. A lieutenant barked frustrated orders over a megaphone. Reorganize, regroup, rescue the target. But no one moved coherently. The exercise teetered on the brink of total failure. A cluster of cadets stumbled into view, Vanessa's squad arguing bitterly, dragging their gear behind them like dead weight. Elena stepped forward, her sneakers, silent on the cracked ground. Without asking, without ceremony, she plucked the radio from the trembling hands of a confused cadet. Squad Echo. Flank northwest at 30 degrees, Elena said into the radio, her voice low but carrying the unmistakable tone of command. Form a staggered column. Establish high ground overwatch. The cadet blinked, startled, but obeyed instinctively. Others followed, drawn by something in her voice they couldn't articulate but couldn't deny. Elena scanned the battered map, eyes sharp. Squad Delta, cease movement. Fortify the ridge at marker 7. Set a decoy perimeter. Pull hostiles away from the extraction zone. The squads moved, no hesitation, no questions. Orders snapped into place like gears in a long-broken machine suddenly grinding back to life. Elena issued commands with the precision of someone who had once led soldiers through kill zones where hesitation meant death. Her gray eyes missed nothing. The slope angles, the hidden sight lines, the natural choke points. Within 20 minutes, the disaster on the field began to reverse itself. Squads reformed. Positions solidified. The wounded target was located, stabilized, and carried to the extraction zone under coordinated cover fire. The final extraction, which was expected to drag into evening, completed in record time. Drones captured it all. The turnaround, the flawless final sweep, the impossible recovery from chaos. The instructors at the command center sat frozen, their screens lighting up with success metrics they hadn't seen in years. Someone finally broke the stunned silence. "Who the hell is leading that?" Eyes turned toward the woman standing near the supply depot. Mud-streaked plane, backpack slung over one shoulder, radio still in hand, her expression calm as a soldier surveying a battlefield. Elena Marsh. The woman they had mocked. The woman they had humiliated. She hadn't just survived their siege, she had just commanded the single most successful operation Red Rock had seen in a decade, and she hadn't even raised her voice to do it. The final extraction bell echoed across the canyon, a long metallic clang that signaled the end of the exercise. Cadets stumbled back toward the staging area, their uniforms coated in dust, their faces flushed with exhaustion and shame. They hadn't saved the mission. Elena had, and everyone knew it. On the observation deck, senior instructors and dignitaries leaned in, whispering furiously behind their hands. The official overseeing the exercise, Colonel Anders, a rigid man with a chest full of medals, barked into his radio, demanding a debriefing immediately. On the ground, the cadets circled near the command tent, tension thick in the dry air. Wyatt Harrington removed his helmet with shaking hands. His pristine appearance from the morning had been replaced with mud-splattered boots and a bruised ego. Vanessa Hale stood stiffly at his side, arms crossed so tightly her knuckles whitened. The usual smirks were gone, replaced by something foreign, something dangerously close to fear. Elena Marsh stood apart, wiping dust from her palms with a calm, mechanical motion. Her gray eyes swept across the crowd, not with contempt, but with the detached clarity of someone who had seen real chaos, real loss, and understood that today was nothing more than theater. Colonel Anders stormed into the courtyard, flanked by a retinue of instructors. His boots struck the concrete with military precision. He stopped in front of the cadets, his gaze sweeping over them like a blade. "Who," he barked, his voice echoing, "authorized a civilian to take command of an academy exercise?" Silence. No one dared speak. Elena said nothing either. She stood still, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. An older instructor, gray-haired and tight-lipped, finally stepped forward. He tapped at a tablet, pulling up the drone footage, replaying the final moments of the rescue. There, broadcast across the big screen, was Elena's voice issuing crisp, clear orders. The footage showed squads moving in perfect synchrony under her direction. The precision, the coordination, the discipline. Not once had she shouted. Not once had she panicked. She had led them out of the chaos as if she had been born for it. Colonel Anders squinted at the footage. His mouth tightened. He turned back to the cadets. "Who is she?" he demanded. For a moment, nobody answered. Then a nervous logistics officer blurted, She's just some visitor. No record, no clearance." Another instructor, older, wiser, frowned deeply as if memory was stirring at the back of his mind. His gaze shifted, more cautious now, more respectful. "I know that style," he murmured, mostly to himself. "That's not a civilian's hand." Colonel Anders narrowed his eyes at Elena. "Identify yourself," he barked. Elena paused. The courtyard seemed to shrink around her, cadets leaning forward, instructors tensing, the entire academy suspended in breathless silence. She lifted her head slightly, her mud-streaked shirt flaring in the rising wind. "Elena Marsh," she said, her voice steady. "Former Commander, Special Tactical Operations Unit, Black Ridge Division." Gasps rippled through the ranks. Black Ridge was legend, an elite force whispered about in halls of power, deployed only for missions so classified most people weren't even allowed to acknowledge their existence. Wyatt Harrington stepped back, as if struck. Vanessa Hale's mouth parted in shock, her perfect braid swinging loose. Colonel Anders's face froze, the blood draining from it. "You were... Marsh?" he rasped. But you resigned." Elena's gaze didn't waver. "I resigned after my team was sacrificed in a failed operation," she said quietly, her voice like a blade wrapped in velvet. "I walked away because politics mattered more than lives." A heavy silence crushed the courtyard. The cadets, the instructors, even the drones hovering above seemed frozen in midair. They hadn't humiliated a civilian. They had humiliated a legend, and, worse, they had revealed their own hollowness, stripped bare by the very woman they had scorned. Elena slung her backpack over her shoulder again, her gray eyes scanning the stunned faces without bitterness, without triumph. She wasn't here for vengeance. She was here to watch. But Red Rock was about to learn that some leaders don't need medals, crests, or titles to command respect. They only needed the truth. And the truth had finally shattered the Academy's golden illusion. The courtyard remained silent long after Elena Marsh spoke her name. It was not the kind of silence born from awe. It was the raw, uncomfortable stillness of a room realizing it had been complicit in something shameful. The cadets, the instructors, even the dignitaries on the observation deck stood like statues. The warm desert breeze tugged at their uniforms, but none dared move. They had mocked a woman whose shadow once loomed larger than their combined pedigrees. Colonel Anders swallowed hard and turned away, muttering orders into his radio. Within minutes, a handful of senior officers marched toward the command center, faces pale, urgency crackling in their clipped movements. Inside the concrete monolith of the command center, data terminals blinked awake, pulling old classified files from the dusty corners of military archives. And there she was, Elena Marsh, the youngest commander to ever lead a Black Ridge tactical unit, decorated with distinctions no cadet at Red Rock could even dream of, commended for battlefield ingenuity in conflicts that didn't officially exist, until it all came crashing down. Red Rock's instructors huddled around the glowing screens, reading the reports that hadn't seen daylight in nearly 5 years. The classified operation, the betrayal, the dead. The commanding officer who had ordered Elena's team into an impossible mission without backup, and then abandoned them when things fell apart, was a name many of them recognized. A senator now. A sponsor of Red Rock's new expansion project. It wasn't incompetence that drove Elena to resign. It was loyalty to her soldiers, not to politics, that sealed her fate. Outside, word began to ripple through the cadets like a wildfire. Some tried to deny it. Some muttered that it had to be a mistake, a coincidence, a trick. But the truth was too heavy to ignore. Vanessa Hale's smirk was gone, replaced by a stricken, almost childish confusion. Wyatt Harrington leaned against a supply crate, his knuckles white against the metal edge, staring into nothing. The realization settled heavily on them. They had treated a war-hardened commander like dirt under their boots, not because she failed, but because she had refused to wear the trappings of their shallow world. In the corner of the courtyard, a younger cadet knelt, retrieving Elena's discarded water bottle, the one she had left behind during the exercise. His hands trembled, slightly as he dusted it off, as if handling a relic. Above them, the command center's loudspeakers crackled to life. "All cadets and instructors are to report immediately to the assembly field for review," the voice barked. "Command attendance. It's mandatory." The message reverberated across the grounds, cold and absolute. This was no ordinary review. This was a reckoning. Elena didn't move. She watched them file out. Cadets who just hours ago had jeered and sneered, now walking stiffly, glancing over their shoulders, hollowed out by the weight of their ignorance. A tap on her shoulder broke the moment. She turned. Standing there, crisp in full-dress uniform, was General Marcus Steele, the Supreme Commander of Strategic Operations. Her husband. He didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. The look in his storm-gray eyes said everything. Anger at what had been done, pride in what she had endured, and an unspoken promise that justice was already gathering like a thundercloud above Red Rock. Elena allowed herself the smallest smile, fleeting and private. She hadn't come to Red Rock for redemption. She hadn't come for revenge. She had come for truth. And now, the walls built on arrogance and illusion were crumbling, brick by brick, under the weight of that truth. The past had been unearthed, and Red Rock would never be the same again. The assembly field buzzed with nervous energy as the cadets and instructors gathered under the pitiless mid-morning sun. Rows of polished boots stamped the cracked concrete. Tactical gear clinked faintly. Muted whispers darted from mouth to mouth, but no one dared speak too loud. The sky above was clear, but the storm was already here, walking across the grounds with purpose. General Marcus Steele. His presence cut through Red Rock like a scalpel. Every stride, every breath he took was heavy with authority that demanded not fear, but reckoning. He stopped in front of the assembled mass. His uniform was immaculate, his chest adorned with commendations that each told a story of wars fought, nations saved, and soldiers honored. And yet, it wasn't his medals that held the crowd in rapt attention. It was the cold fury in his eyes. Elena Marsh stood a few paces behind him, her wrinkled shirt stained with yesterday's humiliation, her canvas backpack still slung over one shoulder. She looked utterly out of place among the pristine ranks, and yet, in every way that mattered, she was the one commanding the ground they stood on. Marcus raised a hand. Silence crashed down. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. When Marcus Steele spoke, the world listened. "Red Rock Command Academy," he said, his voice low and controlled, "is a name that once stood for excellence, for honor, for leadership forged through trial, not entitlement." His gaze swept across the cadets, pausing briefly on Wyatt Harrington, on Vanessa Hale, on every instructor who had turned a blind eye. "And yet I arrived today to find that honor mocked, that leadership has been twisted into vanity, that the values I fought to protect have been trampled under the boots of arrogance." The cadets shifted uneasily. The instructors paled. Major Elena Marsh, he continued, his voice like steel wrapped in ice, did not need to wear a uniform today to command your respect. She earned it in the mud, in the blood, in the silence between battles where good men and women chose duty over comfort. A muscle ticked in Marcus's jaw. You stripped her of dignity. You tried to erase her presence because she did not glitter like you expected, because she did not bow to your false crowns. He let the words hang there, slicing through the humid air. "I will not allow this academy or any institution under my watch to breed leaders who confuse cruelty for strength, arrogance for authority." He turned toward the head of the academy, Director Reynolds, a man who had built his career on legacy rather than merit. The director stood rigid, sweat beading at his temples. "As of this moment," Marcus declared, "I demand an immediate investigation into the conduct of this academy's cadets and staff. Every individual who participated in, condoned, or enabled the harassment of Major Marsh will be suspended, stripped of their candidacy, and permanently flagged for breach of military ethics." A collective gasp swept through the field. Wyatt Harrington's face turned gray. Vanessa Hale's braid slipped loose over her shoulder, her bravado crumbling visibly. "In addition," Marcus said, his voice sharpening, Red Rock's selection criteria will be overhauled. Legacy will no longer be a golden ticket. You will earn your place or you will leave. The weight of his words settled like thunder. He stepped back slightly, allowing the silence to stretch, to sink deep into the bones of those who had believed themselves untouchable. Finally, Marcus turned toward Elena, offering his hand, not as a general to a subordinate, but as a soldier to another who had bled for the same ideals. Elena looked at him for a long moment before she reached out and clasped his hand. Not in deference, in unity. The cadets watched, stricken as the truth they had tried to bury stood before them, unbroken, undeniable. General Steele's ultimatum was clear: change, or be forgotten. And Red Rock, once a fortress of privilege now, trembled on the edge of something it had long forgotten: true honor. The fallout began before the sun had even reached its zenith. As General Steele's ultimatum echoed across the assembly field, Academy officials scrambled like ants from a shattered hill. A storm of communications buzzed through the command center. Emails, firing off, names flagged, access badges revoked in real time. The reckoning was swift. It had to be. At noon, the first suspension notices were handed out, cold and clinical. Wyatt Harrington stood before the tribunal, the polished brass of Red Rock's disciplinary board catching the harsh light. His usual swagger was gone, his tactical vest suddenly heavy on his frame. He was read the charges in a voice devoid of ceremony: conduct unbecoming, abuse of fellow personnel, breach of military ethics. Without protest, he handed over his academy ID, his boots scuffing the concrete as he was escorted off the grounds, his family's political name powerless to save him. Vanessa Hale fared no better. Stripped of rank, stripped of privilege, she stood trembling as her squad mates, those who once rallied behind her, turned away in silence. Her father's influence, once enough to silence entire inquiries, crumbled before the weight of the public investigation now looming over Red Rock. You dishonored your uniform before you even earned it, one instructor muttered as she passed, head bowed in defeat. Clara Vaughn, the logistics officer who had sneered and jeered alongside the cadets, was relieved of duty on the spot. Her protests, sharp and desperate, were met with blank stares. Red Rock had no room left for those who built walls instead of bridges. Even the instructors who had turned their eyes away during Elena's humiliation found themselves standing before the review board, their careers hanging by a thread. Within 24 hours, Red Rock's ranks were slashed by nearly a quarter. The command center issued a public statement. Effective immediately, Red Rock Command Academy will enact systemic reforms to ensure integrity, merit, and respect are the cornerstones of its future leadership. It wasn't just an apology. It was an admission of failure, a confession that the old world, the world of untouchable legacies and manufactured prestige, was burning. The cadets who remained walked the grounds with lowered heads, their uniforms no longer badges of superiority, but heavy reminders of the standard they had failed to uphold. And at the center of it all stood Elena Marsh. She did not speak. She did not demand apologies. She didn't have to. Her very presence was a verdict written in stone. In the following days, whispers of her story spread beyond Red Rock's walls, into the halls of the Pentagon, into the offices of policymakers who had long treated leadership as inheritance. Veterans recognized her name. Officers remembered the missions that had been scrubbed from records but not from memory. Elena's truth had cracked the foundations of a system built on entitlement. And it wasn't just Red Rock that would change. It would be everywhere. Across the field, Marcus Steele watched his wife quietly, pride and grief mingling in his stern gaze. He had always known she was stronger than any medal could ever signify. Now the world knew it too. On the final evening of the week, As the sun bled crimson across the canyons, a new sign was erected at the Academy's main entrance. It bore no family crests, no fancy Latin mottos, only 3 words carved into solid granite: honor over legacy. The cadets stood before it in silence, their reflections trembling in the polished stone. Some wept quietly, some saluted. All understood. The old empire had fallen, and from its ashes something far stronger was being born. The dawn that broke over Red Rock was not the same dawn that had bathed it a week ago. The Academy's polished towers, once symbols of arrogance, now stood silent under a sky washed clean by a storm of reckoning. The flags still fluttered high, above the cliffs, but they no longer flapped for the privileged few. They moved for something new, something hard-won. The reforms announced by General Steele were immediate, and Elena's name was written into every corner of them, whether she wanted it or not. No candidate would be admitted by bloodline alone again. No staff member would look away from cruelty again. No uniform would ever again hide a hollow heart. Elena Marsh, however, did not linger to bask in the aftermath. She stood quietly by the gravel path leading out of the Academy, her faded backpack slung over her shoulder as always, her mud-streaked sneakers tracing invisible patterns in the dust. Her plain white shirt caught the morning light, the stains of humiliation now just silent marks of a battle fought and won without raising a single fist. General Marcus Steele approached, his strides measured, his presence a steady anchor against the changing winds. "You could stay," he said, voice low and certain. "They would welcome you, honor you." Elena smiled faintly, a quiet curve of lips that held more truth than any ceremony could capture. "I didn't come here to be honored," she said. "I came to remind them what honor means." Marcus studied her. For a long moment, the weight of his pride and sorrow palpable. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim, battered pin, an old insignia, a relic from the Black Ridge Division, its edges worn smooth from years of service. He placed it into her hand without a word. Elena closed her fingers around it, feeling the cool metal press into her skin, a reminder not of what she had lost, but of what she had always carried within her. Without fanfare, without salutes or applause, she turned toward the gates. The cadets gathered along the pathway stood stiffly at attention, their uniforms crisp, but their expressions stripped of the arrogance that once clouded them. Many of them saluted her as she passed, not because protocol demanded it, but because respect did. Among them, Wyatt Harrington lowered his head in silent acknowledgement. Vanessa Hale, her posture no longer rigid with superiority, managed a small, trembling nod. The past could not be erased, but the future could be rebuilt. As Elena reached the gates of Red Rock, she paused for a breath, feeling the canyon winds rise around her, tugging at the strands of her ponytail. In that breath was the memory of every battlefield, every fallen friend, every sacrifice that had shaped her. She glanced once, briefly over her shoulder, not with regret, not with bitterness, but with the simple certainty that she had done what needed to be done. And then she stepped beyond the gates, into the wild open spaces beyond Red Rock's manicured grounds, where real battles were fought not with polished boots or gleaming medals, but with courage, endurance, and truth. Marcus fell into step beside her, silent and steady. The Academy gates swung closed behind them with a final, echoing clang. Not a sound of exile, but of completion. A new dawn had risen at Red Rock, and thanks to a woman who wore no crest, who needed no rank to command the world's respect, that dawn would shine brighter than any legacy could. As they disappeared into the light, the Academy stood humbled, changed forever by the quiet force of a soldier who had never needed to shout to be heard.